I want to make one thing clear at the start of this video, and it's that I really tried to like this game, but it ended up testing my patience to the point that I feel like I went through a rite of passage. I knew ahead of time that it was going to be bad, but I decided to pre-order the game nonetheless because I thought that it would be a fun game to play with my mom. She's not a gamer in any sense of the word, but the Lord of the Rings license means a lot to her, and I thought it would just be a fun, mother and son bonding time. Plus, she wouldn't really be able to judge the game because she doesn't really follow the industry in any way, so to her, as long as the game is a looker and it has good music, she's usually happy with it. So all combined, I thought, what's the worst that can happen, right?
What?
Yeah, that was my reaction too when I saw this, and from that moment on, I knew that I just couldn't show it to my mom in any possible way, which is why I got my best friend and girlfriend to play it with me. So I guess that's where my loyalty lies. We soon realized that nothing in this game worked as intended. The game was ugly as sin. The controls are even worse if you can believe it, and that's when you're not clipping and glitching out through the landscape. And last but far from the least, the story wasn't going anywhere, to the point that after 2 hours of playing it, I still had no idea why I was doing what I was doing. Funnily enough though, around the same time, my best friend looked at me in the eye and ordered me to return the game and get my money back. For those reasons and more, I beg you to not buy this game no matter the cost, but if for some reason your morbid curiosity desires more like I often do, then please let me explain why I cannot recommend this game and why, for the love of God, we should never pre-order games, even if we really want to. I want to start off by stating that this has to be the most visually unappealing game that I've seen in a very long time. Everywhere you look, you find low polygon models and muddy textures, and when I say muddy, I do literally mean it though, because it's often impossible to tell what we're actually looking at. The worst is that this issue is even separate from the frequent and irritating pop-in issue which plagues the environment. You can literally stay there for minutes and it just won't load, making me question if it's even a loading issue or if it was made that way by design, which is insane to me to imagine. It's even made worse by the fact that we're starting the game in Mordor. It all looks gray and brown, and it's all made worse because of the slim offering and ambience design. Where's the grimness of the landscape? Where are all the screams, the orcs yelling, the clicking of their armor? I'm honestly surprised that more effort wasn't even put into it, because it's not like they didn't have any point of references. They could have easily looked at the excellent Shadows of Mordor games just to get a sense of what to do, but nope, we just had to get this travesty instead. To the game's credit though, it does get brighter and more interesting starting chapter 7. There are ruins and natural environments to explore, and even if it's still assaulting your retina, it feels easier to immerse ourselves because a lot of the colors on display. Nature always seems to blur when you're not paying attention, so it's really just one of those moments where I can confidently state that the game looks okay. The worst offense here, in my opinion, is how they modeled Gollum. The lack of detail on his face, mostly around his mouth and nose, makes him revolting to look at. We all cringed when we were forced in a cutscene and had to watch his nightmare in action. The only saving grace for the character would be his voice actor. He'll certainly never replace the stellar performance that Andy Serkis gave in the trilogy, but I think that he did a good job at selling me the conflict that both Smeagol and Gollum have on a regular basis, even if his performance can be a little uneven at best.
Can you be patient?
Patient, yes, we are. We has been. Like spiders. Very, very patient.
Good.
Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save this game, as all other characters aren't well voice acted and never have anything interesting to say, which unintentionally complements the overall package pretty well. You'd think that this would be enough, right? There's enough here to warrant a refund, but there's actually more. Even if the game looks like it belongs on the PlayStation 2 and not the PS5 as what you're seeing here, it also suffers from frame rate issues, glitched out audio, and gameplay bugs that often make the game unplayable, which I'll get into later. I can go on how this game looks like rigor mortis, but my point here is that there's nothing that feels current or even past gen. The license has so much to offer and none of it can be found here, which is downright shameful. Now, I know what you might be thinking, okay? You're concentrating on the superficial stuff, right? Surely the story and the gameplay must be better, right?
No, God!
I don't even know where to start to explain to you how what you've just seen is a fraction of the problem that this game has, because it feels even worse to experience it. Single-player multiplayer games are generally experienced in two ways, gameplay and story. As this is based on a license that captures the hearts of its viewers with the characters that populate it, I'll therefore start with the story. Bilbo has stolen the ring from Gollum, and after weeks of searching for it, he gets caught by orcs because he was too busy chasing a beetle. He ends up in a workers' camp in Mordor, and you spend the next 5 chapters learning the ropes and gaining the trust of the person in charge, which the workers have dubbed the Candle Man. Sounds super sinister, right? The person in charge of Mordor is called the Candle Man. This fucking game. That means that you'll be spending most of your time on screen completing chores that have zero purpose and are barely ever explained, like this one here where you have to lock the kettle inside the rotating fence. Why is the kettle outside the open area, and why do you need to even put it indoors is beyond me, but we have to do it, so I run in front of them only to find out that they get in the area and never actually leave, removing the urgency related to the task. We then get to repeat the process, and the same thing happens again, and that is if you actually get lucky. I once had a moment where the kettle just forgot that I existed, so I had to ram into them in order to bring them back to their senses. Afterwards, you have to collect some numbers which act as ID cards in a prison. Collect all 8 and then we get to move on to the next mundane task. I would say that half of the game is like this in some way. Dump 6 red substances in the polluted water, find more ID cards because yes, one wasn't enough, right? Take part in the bird hatching minigame where guessing is what you're supposed to do is the name of the game, and so much more. It's hard enough that we have filler quests in the second chapter of the game, but it's even worse when you realize that it's actively trying to destroy your progress. On my second day at the camp, one of the quests will require you to go inside the tunnel in order to activate a bomb located at the very end of the path. Once it's done, you have to come back and avoid the toxic fumes, rinse and repeat. But on the third and final one, I ended up dying and the game respawned me at the start of the entrance with the gate closed. This old geezer is supposed to open the gate so that we may go inside the tunnel, but for some reason, the game saved with him glitching, so reloading the save didn't actually work. After multiple reloads, I decided to close the game and fully restart it, and this time, the game spawned me in another area entirely, with the kicker being that it refused to load the rest of the map. I couldn't go back in the area that was supposed to be, so I had to fully restart the goddamn chapter. Which means that I had to redo all of those shitty side quests again. This is also where both my spouse and my friend told me that enough is enough and they left. I couldn't blame them though, because honestly, if it was up to me, I would have probably quit before if I wasn't planning on making this video. So I want to thank my masochistic brother for being curious enough to actually offer his services. So shout out to you, my dude, because that chapter 2 was horrible, and if it wasn't for you, I would not have finished it. So props. I also want to make it clear that this situation, which feels to me like purposeful sabotage, isn't unique to this instant. There's another moment where I'm supposed to jump on a driving wagon, but the checkpoint gives it a head start, so it was impossible for me to catch up, and the floor is made of lava for some reason, which is why I die on impact. After dying a few dozen times, I found out that there were more coming, so all I had to do was to wait patiently and jump on the next one. I know that one doesn't sound really bad, but imagine having to redo that same part over and over and over again, and you thinking that it's literally the only one that you can grab, and the game gives it a head start. Worse still though, the other time that it happened, the game saved just before I got caught by a guard, giving me about a second to try and avoid the instant death animation, which sounds and looks like this.
Don't try that again.
Imagine, I had to repeat this part over and over and over until I got lucky somehow and survived long enough to change the checkpoint. 3 times that this game actively tried to make me quit, and with the game only having one save at a time and it frequently saves, it can become a huge problem if you get unlucky, and trust me, you will get unlucky with this game. You know what's the worst part? I actually still haven't told you about the worst part. After Gollum has been in the camp for months, he gets to show the ropes to a rookie, and it is the worst. Absolutely the freaking worst. His voice is irritating, his model is repulsive, and just look at the walking speed. Look at it! Who approved this? Like, what the hell is this? It's so slow. So, there's a mission early on where you get to bring the kettle inside the cage again, but this time you have to control him and guide him to the freaking switch because he has less brain cells than Gollum does, which is honestly pretty freaking hilarious, but that's a story for another day, right? Oh, and by the way, look at his death animation for this minigame.
Go!
Yes, all right.
What the hell was that? We can survive a few hits, but him? Not even an indirect bump. Also, this part was way harder than it looks because it turns out that in order for the kettle to ignore him, you need to make him do a 180, and just look at how stupidly this was all programmed.
Hurry.
That way?
Go over there.
I don't like this.
Hurry.
On my way.
Ironically, there's an achievement for killing him in every possible way, and I got it by accident because all segments of him are like this, and they're so badly implemented that killing him became unavoidable. The same thing goes when you are actually controlling Gollum. He can only climb or hold on to surfaces that have a white chalkboard line above or on it, which means that you'll often either be hitting a bunch of invisible walls, or you'll be dying because the surfaces weren't Gollum approved. The immersion is constantly being broken because either the surfaces often stand out and look unnatural in the worst way imaginable, or you think that you can jump somewhere only to be proven wrong because the consistency is just off. To make matters worse, on some rare occasions, the game has the exact opposite problem where it's practically impossible to find what you're supposed to do. Those are often the same moments where your camera decides to spin out of control and make it impossible to look, let alone aim your jumps. Mix in the horrible momentum system, which often makes you miss a jump because you either jump too far or not enough for some reason, and you end up in a game that feels horrible to play. That problem also made worse by its lack of supporting in traditional animations. Gollum will only grip onto what's in front of him, so any side turns in the air or any form of rotation will make you miss the jump because it wasn't added in the game. This issue is made even clearer when you examine how he jumps from one platform to another. When jumping, you have to choose between pressing the X button to jump forward or the square button to jump backwards. The problem is that you cannot steer him in the air, so if you press the wrong button and your angle isn't perfect, you will die because Gollum controls as fluently as a chain-smoking forklift. That little dude has zero stamina most of the time, making everything slower than it should be. However, the weird exception is that Gollum jumps like Alex Mercer without his powers. He jumps really high and often executes a weird cinematic shot when it's a little too far off. All of that combined creates a game that doesn't understand how the genres involved and why some things were made the way that they were. It destroys all moments where tension is supposed to be conveyed and replaces it with frustration and monotony. It rarely feels like it's the player's fault that Gollum died, and that is the worst feeling that you can convey to the player, period. Here's the best example that I can give you. After you leave the concentration camp in Mordor, you end up in a spider's den and a chase sequence ensues. In any other game, this would be this epic sprint to the finish line where parkour is the name of the game and fluidity is the deciding factor on who gets away with his life. Well, in this game, it's impossible to feel that way because you're too busy trying to time your jumps and landing, not to mention that you can't see a thing with the camera angle. There's this one jump at the end that irritated the fuck out of me because I had to jump diagonally without seeing where I was supposed to land. Also, most of the places give you enough time to move on and leave without the spider catching up to you, but this time, however, it feels like the spider speeds up when you miss, which wouldn't surprise me as it's the last jump in the chase. All in all, this is a horrible game, and by the look at the achievements, you can see that most people didn't stick with it, and I totally get it. Actually, there's a 50% drop of players between the completion of the first and second chapter on PS5. Also, only 3.7% of people finished it on the same platform, and I would have been in the same boat if I hadn't planned on making this review. At the same time, my favorite YouTuber at the moment, SkillUp, quit the game before the end of the chapter, so I wanted to, in a way, surpass him and see if his wisdom to stop there was warranted, and honestly, Don't get me wrong though, you will still be completing fetch quests and taking part in some god-awful parkour here and there, but to the very least, there's purpose given to what you're doing, and I would like to add some light to this review and gray up this whole darkish scenario that I've pictured so far. Before we get any further though, I would like to specify that I'm going into spoiler territory. I'll be talking about the ending and the third chapter and everything combined, just so I can portray a more positive light about this game, because in my opinion, it's the only part that actually works one way or another. If for some reason you don't want to be spoiled about this shit game that I can't recommend you, you may skip to this part here where I give the reason as to why I believe personally that this game is in the state that it is. With all that said, let's get right into it. So after you run away from the spider, you get imprisoned by the elves, and therefore we have to plot our escape again. What makes it more complicated this time is the fact that there's a magical fog that circles the surrounding area, preventing threats from coming inside their land and of anyone trying to escape it. In other words, you find yourself in a Trappuccino. Luckily for Gollum and unfortunately for the elves, the mages that created the spell all died during the last exposition, and only one elf was spared, with the cost being her eyesight. They imprisoned her, of course, thinking that she went crazy after whatever happened, so alone and locked up, she remains in her cell. Gollum, on the other hand, putting one and one together, realizes that he has a golden opportunity in his hands. Both of them are unliked by the elves, and both are also prisoners. He decides to team up with her in order to plot his escape. Plus, to be quite fair though, her being blind is actually a blessing at this point, because if she actually took one glance at his disfigured face, any prisoner would beg for an extension to their imprisonment. This context helps fix one of the core issues that the game had so far, which is that there was no purpose as to why we were doing the things that we were forced to do. It's one thing to be a slave and following orders, and it's another thing to do the same tasks in order to push our own agenda. Everything we do for her gets us one step closer to freedom, so it makes most of the quest bearable. At the same time though, everything we do helps forge a bond between the two characters to the point that when we get to the end of the game and Gollum tries to kill her in her sleep, I just froze. I felt as if the game didn't respect the relationship that we had created, and when I saw that Gollum ends up sparing her, I felt it. Don't get me wrong though, every problem that I mentioned still applies here even at the very end of the game, but at least there was closure to the arc that the devs created and it felt satisfying. One game mechanic that I didn't mention so far, and that ties to the ending part, is the dual conflict that Smeagol has with himself. During key moments, the game will ask you to side with either Gollum or Smeagol, and once chosen, you need to convince the opposite side of your decision. All you have to do though is choose one of the floating texts that you think will better suit your intended idea, and then you'll see how the opposite side reacts. It's extremely bare bones for sure, and barely has an impact on the game, but it does sell the conflict that Gollum is facing, making it probably one of the most unique mechanics that the game has, period. When you get to the very end of the game, it attempts to make it personal by giving you some options to kill recurring characters. Sometimes you get to choose, but other times, the game uses those past decisions to make the choice for you. Like, in my playthrough, Gollum ended up killing the master he served in Mordor, and only sparing the elf that had given him his freedom. You can also decide to kill or spare the bird that you helped raise at the beginning of the game. All of this is inconsequential, of course, as the ending is always the same, which makes sense as Gollum needs to be in Moria to stalk the Fellowship, but at least it helps create the illusion that you're playing a better game, and for what it's worth, it worked out for me in the end. If chapter 1 to 6 were 0s or 1s out of 10, the last 4 chapters would have been a 4 or a 5. It's honestly a shame that it is this way, because if the devs removed those 7 chapters and only released the last 4, while dropping the price of the game to like $20, you know, maybe 30, even if that's a lot, then it would have been an okay game at best. If I had to show you one image that depicts how I see this game, it would be this one. We can see that it's a human NPC. He's a slave in his little house, but he's so goddamn ugly that I have a hard time looking at it. Plus, look at his leg. It's twisted in such a weird way that it should be in agony. I'm in agony just looking at it, so it's even more jaw-dropping when you realize that this was made intentionally. No sound of any kind accompanies this person, and barely any effort was made on it, that the only reason that someone would even approve it becomes really clear very fast. They needed to fill up that space, and so they did. There's also something equally as sinister that I avoided to mention so far, and it's that this game actually has the balls to have day 1 DLC, and I think that it shows exactly what their intentions were when they released this game. The first DLC is, ironically enough, emotes for Gollum to perform when you press a button. Totally useless and somewhat insulting, as this game lacks animations in its core gameplay mechanics, but somehow has the balls to charge for additional animations. The second DLC is a straight out blasphemy, charging for the right to get lore facts on the characters and places you visit? I can't even think of a single other game that did this, so it's a really low ball, which complements the last DLC, paying for the elves to speak their native tongue. And you know what's worse than that? They already speak it in the main game. You will hear them speak it from time to time, so this is essentially the devs or the publisher charging you in order to unlock the rest. On a similar note, after seeing the state of the game and those 3 DLCs, I'm ready to state that I don't think that the devs are in the wrong here. I don't have any proof of this, of course, this is just a theory that I have in mind here, but when I examine the game, it doesn't feel like any love or interest was put into it. Its basic gameplay was done wrong, with a story that nobody asked for, and a character that no one was begging for an encore. It just doesn't make any sense to me why anyone in their rightful mind would make a game like this in a genre that barely exists anymore, other than to make money money, which is why I turned towards the publisher. This year, they also published Blood Bowl 3, which had so much cosmetic DLC that the game felt purposely broken in order to force people to buy the DLCs. Last year, they released Vampire the Masquerade Swan Song, which is also a broken piece of manure, and the same goes for Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood, which came the year before, just to name a few. Oh, and the shit that they pulled for Sinking City deserves its own freaking video, and honestly, Frogware, I totally respect you. So, at the end of this video, I want to end it on a more positive note and state that I actually sympathize with the developers. It doesn't excuse their missteps, and it doesn't excuse the fact that this game should have been cancelled, but it is what it is, right? So with all that said, Mom, I hope that you better understand why we ended up not playing this game in the end, because your time ain't worth wasting, and my time was worth wasting just so I can make this video, hoping that whoever is basically listening will not get this game, because it doesn't deserve any of your time and money, no matter how cheap it ends up being. So with all that said, I hope you're gonna excuse me, because I actually have a game I need to return.
Come on! Are you sleeping? When they send you into the light, that's when you can sleep. What is this? A rat hole?